we return. You're listening to America's Voice Now. You know, our goal, the goal of this program is to educate and inform, to motivate and activate grassroots activity, to raise the roof, to raise our hands in protest, to raise our voices and educate those within our circle of influence, and to control the course and the path of the United States of America. We must take action, and we must do so now. Time is up, folks. And how do I know that? Well, you don't have to be much of a student of history. You don't have to be a political science major. You only have to join the other 80% of Americans who say, we are desperately headed in the wrong direction. This morning in the Telegraph, that's a UK paper, the Chinese have come out and say that the world should de-Americanize. Now, this is a nation which, you know, back in the days of Nixon, we didn't even have communication with, because they're a communist government. We've allowed them to steal our revenue, steal our jobs, steal our industry, copy and manufacture everything that we invented. The Chinese are great copiers, but they're not really great innovators. They're not great creators. But boy, give them anything and they can manufacture it faster, cheaper. And they do it because they manipulate their own currency and their own labor force to accomplish that. That iPhone in your pocket is built by slave labor, ladies and gentlemen. You have to recognize what China is. They are a prison state, not a nation state. They are a nation/prison state. And their goal as a nation is the ultimate destruction of the United States of America. Their number one competitor for revenue, jobs, power, military, monetary, and political. If you don't think that the communists that run China are more interested in communizing the rest of the world than they are in Americanizing the rest of the world, you're a damn fool. And they're utilizing every political fallout in the United States to achieve that end. The looming prospect of the U.S. debt default has prompted China to come out and start to say that the world should de-Americanize. Now listen, this is Xinhua, which is the Chinese official news agency. This is the equivalent of what Pravda was during the Russian USSR years. They are nothing more than a mouthpiece for the national government of China, which tells you exactly how China feels about us. Now, you got to understand how important this is, because we have allowed them into, first of all, we've allowed them to have most favored nation trading status. That is destructive of America in terms of industry, jobs, revenue, GDP, inflation, banking. I mean, it's wrong for America in every respect. Nothing about most favored nation trading status and the entrance of China into the World Trading Organization was for your benefit. This is a long-held goal and a long-sought goal of the progressive left. They tried to do it with Russia as far back as early 1900s, and they've been working at it. Now that Russia's collapsed, they're using China as the model. We've had congressmen and senators that have come out and told us that China should be the model for the world. Really? You mean the same China that has 8 and 10-story buildings that are connected to a factory that are all built within a fenced compound where no one is allowed to live, where they actually have cyclone fencing that comes off the side of the building for 20 feet. And the purpose of that is it's up at about the 20-foot mark. And it's to catch people who try to commit suicide and jump off the building. Because they don't like making your iPhone, your iPod, and your other gadgets. They don't like to be forced to slave labor, to support American consumerism. Yes, that same consumerism that you are fostering by buying another big screen TV. Xinhua, the official government news agency. Now, just the name or the title, the official government news agency, says it all. Here was their quote. "It is perhaps a good time for the befuddled world to start considering building a de-Americanized world." This was in response to Christine Lagarde, the IMF chief, who is a globalist of stunning proportion, when she raised the specter of a repeat of the 2008 financial crash. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to recognize. Xinhua has attacked America's preeminent position in the world. Why? Because we are head-to-head with them. Here's what they say. Such alarming days when the destinies of others are in the hands of a hypocritical nation have to be terminated. They hold $1.28 trillion in U.S. bonds. But what's really important is not the $1.28 trillion in American bonds they hold. What's really important is the $3.5 trillion that they hold in U.S. dollar denominated assets. Now, you'll hear that phrase frequently. What you don't know, and what none of us really know, is what are those U.S. dollar denominated assets? Well, a lot of it is real estate. The question is it publicly owned real estate, i.e. they bought an office building in New York? Or is it based upon the collateral of our national parks, which have been pledged as collateral? Here's what they say. The cyclical stagnation in Washington for a viable bipartisan solution over a federal budget and an approval for raising debt ceiling has again left many nations' tremendous dollar assets in jeopardy and the international community highly agonized. Well, I got to tell you something. What we should stop doing is worrying about what China thinks, and what we should start doing is worry about what's right for America. We can pay off the debt we owe China, and we should. We can pay the interest we owe China, and we should. But more importantly, we should stop borrowing more money. Why? Well, first of all, China is not even buying more money from us. Recognize that they're not buying any more American debt. They haven't in the last couple of years. In fact, their number of $1.28 trillion has been it's actually fallen. It used to be $1.35 trillion. Who is buying our debt? The Federal Reserve, the central banks. It's not foreign governments, people. It's the central banks, including our own Federal Reserve, a private cabal of bankers who have swollen their own holdings on the United States from about 800, I've heard the estimates range from $600 to $800 billion before 2008. since 2008, irrespective of what that amount was, it is now $3.6 trillion. And they're going to continue to buy another trillion a year going forward. Here's the problem. We don't need to borrow more money. We need to live within the income that we have. And I fail to understand why every pundit, every talking head, every other radio host out there, every political entity, every congressman, every senator is not just simply saying we have to separate the word default and the word debt ceiling from each other. They are not the same thing. Failure to raise our debt ceiling, and Moody's came out and said this, but nobody else in the media is trumpeting it. Nobody else on Capitol Hill is telling you, and nobody on any of the talking heads in any of the news programs are telling you this. Why? Because they are all interested in influencing your thinking by tying the concept of debt ceiling and default together. And they are not the same thing. We can simply refuse to borrow more and still pay off our debt. In fact, if we don't begin to do that immediately, if not sooner, what we will end up with is a completely unsurvivable scenario. The Weimar Republic, if you will, of the United States of America. The Weimar Republic was so overloaded with debt, they had to default. And defaults traditionally do cause, international problems in the sense that foreign nations have money tied into it, and when that collapses, their economies tumble like dominoes. Well, the truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to default on our debt just because we don't raise the debt ceiling. The two are diametrically opposed. Think about it in your own personal example. Because you are already over-leveraged, you don't go out and borrow more money. You stop borrowing and you begin to live within the wherewithal that you have. You reduce your spending to an appropriate level that is commensurate with your income. But you don't go out and borrow more. But the IMF would have you think that that is the goal. And yet, the truth of the matter is, they have proven themselves to be liars. And here's why. Christine Lagarde from the IMF, and I'm going to take this on in the next segment, but I want to read you this quote, and we'll read it again in that section. But when it comes to the U.S. economy, Christine Lagarde, she's the head of the IMF, International Monetary Fund, she says, hurry up, but slow down. What? That sounds like the military's adage of hurry up and wait. She goes on to clarify and says, hurry up because measures have to be taken now to deal with entitlements, as you suggested. Because there is a level of entitlement coming up and big liabilities coming up as well in terms of interest payment. We're going to analyze this in just a second. But we say slow down because the point is not to contract the economy by slashing spending brutally now as recovery is picking up. Wow. Talk about oxymoron. Key emphasis on the phrase moron. But, what she's saying is that we need to borrow more money so that we can spend more for a recovery. Well, look, folks, we've just spent $7 trillion on a recovery, and we don't have jack spit to show for it. We don't have jack spit. We don't have anything to show for a $7 trillion expenditure. What have we achieved? The banks have become more solvent, yes. Does that help Americans? Heck no. They're not lending. They're gathering. They're gathering in the sheaves for what they know to be, like Joseph of Egypt knew, that was the coming famine. But what did Joseph do? Well, when the famine came, he said, "Give me everything you own, and then I will feed you and your people." He used that as an opportunity to annex great wealth into Egypt. He made them turn in their gold. He made them turn in their animals. He made them turn in their industries before he would feed their people. What do you think these banks are going to do? The truth of the matter is, America is in desperate trouble. And the first thing that we need to do, and every nation needs to do, when they find themselves in trouble, and you find yourself in a hole, what's the old phrase? When you find yourself standing in a hole with a shovel in your hand, stop digging. Stop borrowing. Stop borrowing any money. We can solve our problem, but not if we continue to fund ridiculous, asinine projects, completely decimating our own economy by fostering dependency and slavery upon America with things like endless food stamp programs and endless studies and giveaways to cronies in these failed attempts to, I mean, look, $500 million in the overall scheme of things doesn't sound like much, but we have spent, folks, literally hundreds of billions of dollars on boondoggle projects that this government knew out of that the $7 trillion that Obama's borrowed. We have spent literally hundreds of billions of dollars on projects that we knew were never going to go anywhere. All it was a payoff for the people that helped them get in office. If you stop that, you don't need to borrow more. What we do need to do is completely revamp our entitlement system. That money is all forcibly pulled off the budget, right off the top. It's not even eligible for a review. That needs to be trimmed dramatically. Means testing for Medicaid, means testing for Medicare, means testing for free EBT food and phones. We need to take the disability rolls and take the people off the rolls who are really utilizing it as a permanent source of unemployment. And we need to get regulation off the backs of American businesses. We need to get the concept of Obamacare out of our American enterprise so that corporations can actually do what corporations do. Hire people and build a better product for a lower cost and compete globally. You want to get rid of China. You want China off of our back. The only way to accomplish that is to beat them at their own game. But playing into their hands and allowing the nation to basically founder while the Chinese sit there and say to us, "We told you this would happen. You should have followed our model of communism." You see, we could follow the communist Chinese model. You know what would happen? Complete and utter decimation of the world economy. You know why? Because we're the only ones that are holding it up with our consumerism, you idiots. China's not going to buy U.S.-made washers and dryers and iPods and phones. And the rest of the world doesn't have the money. We're the only ones. 70% of our entire economy is based on what? Consumerism. That's crap you buy. And it just keeps shuffling the money around in circles. Did you ever hear the old story about the guy who goes into a hotel and he says, I want to rent this hotel room. And he says, I'm going to give you $100 deposit. And he says, but I got to just go and check on this meeting. If I come back in an hour and the meeting's been canceled, I'm not going to stay for the night. And the clerk says, that's fine. So he leaves the $100 deposit and he runs off to his meeting. The clerk, meanwhile, grabs that $100 and she goes over and she pays off of a debt that she has to the grocer across the street. And the grocer takes the $100 and he goes down the road to the guy who he owes money to at the shoe factory, and he pays off the $100 he owes him for leather that he sold at his shop. Then the guy over at the leather shop, he goes across to this clothing store and he pays off the $100 debt he's got there. And then the guy at the clothing shop, he runs over to the place where the corporation is, and he pays off the $100 debt he owes to the company. And then the clerk over there at the company takes the $100 and she goes over to the hotel where the guy is staying, and she says, you know, we owe you this for one of our visitors who came in that the company agreed to pay for. And she pays the $100 hotel clerk to the hotel clerk for the company's debt. The guy comes back in about an hour and a half and he says, listen, they've canceled my meeting and I can't stay, so I want my deposit back. And the clerk says, sure, here you go. And she gives him the $100 back. Think about it. What really was accomplished? Think about it. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to talk about the International Monetary Fund. And we're going to talk about Christine Lagarde and central bankers and how the mass media and the press across the globe is pressuring America to borrow more money. They got us over a barrel and they know it. They are trying to use Cass Sunstein's concept of nudge. And the press and the media are alive with the argument that the U.S. needs to borrow more money and resolve their debt crisis. By borrowing more? It's a sham, America. We'll be right back. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. We'll be back in just a moment.